I don't know how to write this intro without it sounding super hacky, so let's just cut right to the chase. I'm a huge fan of the Yakuza franchise, and despite some of its recent missteps, it is still a franchise that I am enormously passionate for. For a series that's so focused on fighting, though, I've always thought it kind of a blunder that there's never been a proper fighting game for the franchise. So today, I want to imagine for a bit what a roster for a hypothetical Yakuza fighting game would look like, and give some of my ideas for things that set the game apart and what to do for some of the characters on the roster. My hypothetical fighting game will be a traditional one-on-one fighting game, so whenever I discuss how a character plays, that's what I want you to imagine. Full disclaimer before we get started, I am not a game designer, and I have no experience at all with anything of the sort. I don't think that anything that I discuss in this video would be impossible to develop by the standards of the modern video game industry, but who knows. Also, to cover my ass, this video will contain spoilers for all Yakuza games, mainline and spin-offs. You have been warned. One of the biggest questions I asked myself was, what do we do with characters that have multiple fighting styles? I batted around a few ideas, like having multiple versions of the same character on the roster, one for each respective fighting style, but I think that would lead to a lot of bloating on the roster. Although this is just a fantasy of mine, I do want to have some restraint on the size of the roster. I want to strike a nice balance of realistic but also what I would want. I think the best way to handle characters with multiple fighting styles would be to have a sort of Mortal Kombat X-like variation system. When you choose a character that has multiple fighting styles, say Kiryu for example, you'll then be asked what fighting style you would like to play as. A character like Kiryu has had more fighting styles than anybody else in the entire franchise, so I think it'd be a cool way to not only add variety to the roster, but also pay homage to the entire franchise. It'd be a bit much for these variations to be entirely new characters in and of themselves, so maybe, like MKX, each character would have a foundation that would be built upon with the different fighting styles. Maybe, for example, base Kiryu would be his iconic dragon fighting style, and then if you chose the Rush variation, he would have moves from the Rush moveset added to his kit. Although in retrospect, this does kind of sound like a balancing nightmare, especially for characters that have had a lot of fighting styles like Kiryu. But it's just a fantasy, so I'm not worried about balancing. Another question I had to ask myself was, how would the average match of this game go? I think the game should play more like a fighting game than a Yakuza game. In my mind, I imagine the game as sort of a 2D Tekken, not really focused on special moves, but just the actual throwing of hands, with a character's choice of martial arts heavily dictating how they play. Combat in Yakuza games has always been a pretty standard affair. You have a basic combo with different enders based on when in the combo you press your heavy attack button. Attacking enemies grants you buildup in your heat meter, which can then be expended to do a heat action, cashing out your heat for big damage and flashy moves. To translate this into a fighting game, I think heat should function basically the same way. You can build heat by attacking your enemy and doing taunts, and then expend it all as a super in the form of a heat action. I know Tekken doesn't do supers this way, but I feel like it would be weird to just entirely remove heat from the game, considering how important it is to the combat of the series. Now that we've gotten how I think the game would play out of the way, let's discuss who I think should be on the roster. Let's start with the characters that I think are shoo-ins, the obvious ones, that guarantees the ones that you cannot imagine a Yakuza fighting game without. I think being a playable character automatically grants you guarantee status on the roster. This will immediately give us the following characters: Kazuma Kiryu, Shun Akiyama, Tiger Saejima, Masayoshi Tanimura, Tatsuo Shinada, Goro Majima, Ichiban Kasuga, Takayuki Yagami, and Masaharu Kaito. There are a few playable characters that I've missed, but I'll indulge more on them later. I think this is a pretty healthy start, so let's discuss how I think the game would handle these characters. To start off with, I think Kiryu would be the standard all-rounder character in my eyes. He'd be ultimately very basic to play, but very rewarding to those that know the fundamentals, and plus his myriad of fighting styles would add much needed variety to his moveset. For his fighting style variations, Kiryu would have his 3 styles from Yakuza 0, Brawler, Rush, and Beast, his signature Dragon style, and plus his Agent style from Like a Dragon Gaiden. Akiyama would be the game's signature rushdown character. His speedy, kicking fighting style would lend itself very well to a ruthless rushdown playstyle. I think there's a lot of fun stuff you could do with his taunts. He wouldn't have any fighting style variations though, since he had the same fighting style in both of his playable appearances in Yakuza 4 and 5. Saejima would be the game's grappler, and probably my main. Maybe he could also be the game's armor character, to pay homage to his infamous Herculean spirit. The closest character that I can compare to how Saejima would play would be Hugo from Street Fighter. He'd have a hard time getting in, but he's absolutely devastating once he does. Tanimura was the first character that I kind of struggled with how he would play. In Yakuza 4, Tanimura had a lot of gimmicks in combat because he was the technique guy, while Akiyama focused on blistering speed and Saejima focused on overwhelming power. Tanimura could parry, grab, and arrest enemies and had the largest heat bar of the 4 playable characters in that game, with more heat actions than anybody else, with heat actions that had multiple variations depending on the buttons you pressed, and a heat action for every ender of his rush combo. He had a lot going for him, and I was struggling to figure out how to translate this into a fighting game in a way that wouldn't be super annoying. I asked a friend of mine that is also very passionate about the Yakuza franchise what he thought Tanimura would be like. He suggested Tanimura would be like Asuka from Tekken with her Sabaki parry, and I think it's the right direction to go with him. Tanimura will be a very technical character with a lot of unorthodox moves that will reward those that are willing to dedicate the time to learn him. He'll have his parry and his arrest, both being extremely difficult to pull off in a match, but they'll lead a huge reward if you can successfully perform them. Shinada was another character that I struggled a little bit on how to handle him in-game. He definitely has the most unorthodox fighting style in the entire series. It's a sort of a unrefined street brawling style that's very reliant on getting foes into grabs. But Shinada was also the weapons guy in Yakuza 5, having unique movesets for various weapons that other characters did not have access to. But to me, that side of his moveset always felt unfinished, so I think it'd be best if we focus on the grappling part of his moveset. So, Shinada will be a grappler, with a ton of options for getting his opponents into grabs, and a ton of options once you have a foe in your grasp. He wouldn't do as much damage as someone like Saejima, but he's still equally as deadly. Although maybe deadly isn't the right word, because nobody ever fucking dies in these games. Majima would be a pretty straightforward character. I imagine him moving and playing like a 2D rendition of Taki from Soul Calibur, a rushdown character that has overwhelming pressure with knife-based attacks. He'd have to be toned back a bit though, to compensate for the amount of fighting styles that he has. He'd have his 3 styles from Zero, Thug, Breaker, and Slugger, his iconic Mad Dog fighting style, plus his pirate style from Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii, which I am begrudgingly going to mention. That's as recent as I'm going to go with Yakuza games. I will not acknowledge anything from Kiwami 3 and Dark Ties. That game can go fuck itself. I'm getting sidetracked though. Ichiban is a unique case here. Since he's the main protagonist of the turn-based games, we have to approach how he plays a little bit differently. Ichiban does have a fighting style, but it's honestly not that useful in the turn-based games, just because of how much better it is to use literally any other class. To have the best of both worlds, I came up with this idea. Any party member from the turn-based games that I include on the roster will have 2 variations. Their default class, i.e. Ichiban's Freelancer class, Adachi's Detective class, or Namba's Homeless Guy class, and 1 additional class that I think would be appropriate for the character. I think it's a fun way to add variety to the roster while also paying homage to the different classes of the turn-based games. Getting back to Ichiban, the obvious answer is to give him his Freelancer class, plus his iconic Hero class. Like Kiryu, he'd be another all-rounder type of character, but I think he would have more options for more situations than Kiryu would. It just feels appropriate for Ichiban's character to have more options than Kiryu, who unfortunately had to punch his way out of most situations. In the world of my hypothetical Yakuza fighting game, it's also a world where Tafuya Kimura doesn't belong to a really annoying agency, allowing them to use his likeness for Yagami once more. Yagami, like Kiryu, is another all-rounder, but with his multiple styles to compensate. Yagami would be more rushdown focused than Kiryu would be, since his fighting styles lend themselves more to agility and dexterity than pure strength. And last but not least for now would be Kaito. The problem with Kaito is that he doesn't actually have his own unique fighting style. Both of his styles are reuses of Kiryu's Yakuza 0 fighting styles, with some own Kaito flair added to make it not an entirely rip-off. That's not worded right, but you know what I'm trying to say. I think it'd be cool to give Kaito his own unique moveset, something akin to Saejima, a big, slow guy, but he will bust ass if he's given the opportunity to. Maybe he could have a heat action where he calls in his son Jun to beat ass together. That was a lot, but let's keep going. Now that we've got some of our good guys out of the way, let's do some villains. The Yakuza franchise is nothing without its bad guys, and I would be remiss to not include some of them. There are some shoo-ins like the previous section, but also some more out-of-left-field ones that I think would make cool additions to the roster. For the villain selections, I want Daisuke Kuze, Akira Nishikiyama, Ryuji Goda, Yoshitaka Mine, Takumi Someya, Toru Hirose, Joe Sawashiro, Yutaka Yamai, Mitsuru Kuroiwa, and Jun Kuwana. There are a few other villains that I think you can make an argument for, such as Aizawa from Yakuza 5, but I can't fight the feeling that somebody like him would just be a waste of roster space. But now that we've gotten our fill of foes, let's discuss how I think they would play. Kuze would fill the role of our boxing guy that I think every fighting game is legally mandated to have. Yagami also has a boxing style, but that would just be a variation he would have as opposed to Kuze, whose whole shtick would be boxing. Yagami's boxing style would be quick and speedy, while Kuze's is more brutal and ruthless. Nishiki's fighting style is actually kind of similar to Kiryu's, so I imagine that Nishiki would be the Ken to Kiryu's Ryu. While they may operate quite similarly, Nishiki would have enough to set him apart from his Oath brother. He'd be slightly faster, but also slightly weaker than Kiryu. I know I said that I'm pulling Ryuji Goda from Yakuza 2, but I'm imagining him from his playable appearance in Yakuza Dead Souls, where he had a machine gun arm. I think it adds some much needed variety in what would otherwise be a pretty bland brawler moveset, but you kind of need Ryuji Goda because he's one of the most iconic villains in the series. Speaking of pretty standard brawlers though, Mine fits that category perfectly, but I can't imagine the roster without him because of his popularity and because his moveset has been reused approximately 12 trillion times throughout the series that we've seen it enough to warrant it being in the game. Maybe he has something you could pull from his playable appearance in Dark Ties to spice up his moveset, but I'm not doing any research on that shit. Someya would be the game's resident sword guy, paying homage to his legendary fight at the end of Yakuza 6. He'd probably play as a standard sword guy, but he'd be the only sword guy in a game full of punching guys. I think he could do a lot of fun things with how Hirose plays. His fight is one of the standout ones in 6 for me because of how unique it is and how genuinely threatening Hirose feels during the fight. This might be stretching the de-emphasized special moves thing a bit far, but I think it'd be really cool if he had a teleport and he could appear behind his opponent a la Jason Voorhees in Mortal Kombat X. I think it would fit well with his fighting style, and it would give him something to stand out. I'd imagine Hirose almost like a Samurai Showdown character. He'd be pretty slow, but if he lands a hit, it would be lethal. I imagine Sawashiro from his rendition in Infinite Wealth during his fight with Kiryu, where he fights with a cane. He can be a limb zoner with it, with very long-reaching pokes, like Billy Kane from Fatal Fury. Yamai is a strange character, and I don't have one exact way that he plays in my head, but I think there's a whole lot you could do with him. I think it'd be neat if there was a way to play with his whole being cold shtick, like perhaps you have to keep him warm somehow, like managing your oil status with Hakan in Street Fighter 4. Or you can make him more of a brawler-oriented character and unleash devastating attacks with his crowbar. Kuroiwa would be an assassin-type character, maybe with some sort of blinding move to play with the whole thing with him gouging people's eyes out. Like Nishiki being the Ken to Kiryu's Ryu, Kuroiwa would be the Akuma to Yagami's Ryu. While they do have quite a few of the same moves, Kuroiwa would be hit much harder than Yagami while being more fragile. And finally, Kuwana would be Yagami's Ken, because they fight pretty similarly and are on pretty equal footing strength-wise. I know I keep making characters similar to each other, but that's a bit of the fault of the series and also my own admitted lack of creativity. I want the way that these characters move to do the heavy lifting of differentiating them, more than any archetypes can. Most of the characters in this game are realistically just going to be brawlers because that's what these guys do. They brawl. Now that we've done some villains, I want to do a bit of a roundup and then call the roster there. I'm going to name some characters off and then I'll explain my reasonings for their inclusion afterwards. In this roundup, we will have Daigo Dojima, Koichi Adachi, Yu Nanba, Saiko Mukoda, Son Hee, Kaoru Sayama, Tatsuya Ukyo, and Ryoma Sakamoto. I think a lot of these characters are pretty self-explanatory, but I'll explain them all anyways, just in case. Daigo is a pretty obvious pick, considering how important he is to this whole series. Adachi, Namba, Saiko, and Son Hee all fill the Ichiban's party quota, and I think they'd each be able to bring something unique to the table that I will later discuss. Sayama is here because she's a personal favorite character of mine, and this roster really needs more women. Tatsuya represents an often forgotten part of the history of the Yakuza franchise, and I think his addition would shine a much-needed spotlight onto it. And finally, Ryoma Sakamoto is here to represent the Feudal Japan spin-offs. Now that we've gotten all that out of the way, let's discuss how I think these guys would fight. Daigo is an interesting case, because he definitely has the capability to throw hands, although most of the time it's with somebody that he should not be fighting. His real calling in life should have been as a hitman though, as Daigo is quite the marksman. He's one of the few characters in the franchise that actually seems to get smarter when the guns get drawn. I want to reflect his leadership capabilities in his fighting style somehow, so I propose that Daigo has a few different fighting styles. The foundation will be his basic street fighting style, and he have two variations, one focused on guns, and one that plays like Captain Ginyu from Dragon Ball FighterZ. Just hear me out for a second. Daigo, he's the 6th chairman of the Tojo clan. He is sending these guys out to die for the clan. So, why not have a fighting style where he, sends dudes out to fight for him? I think it'd be really funny. That's why I thought of it. Moving on. Ichiban's party members can all fulfill a different niche. I previously mentioned that Ichiban and his party members should have 2 fighting styles each in the form of different jobs to pay homage to the class system of the turn-based games. Like I said for Ichiban, he'd have his freelancer class and his hero class. Adachi would be a grappler with his detective job, kind of similar to how Tanimura would be, and his other job would be the enforcer job from Yakuza 7, which would play like Braum from 2XKO. Also, side note, if you didn't run the enforcer job on Adachi in Yakuza 7, were you really playing Adachi? Nanba's homeless guy job can be a zoning variation, using his tricks of the trade to control the flow of the match. His other job will be the Pyromancer class from Infinite Wealth, which would be more of an all-rounder class that does a little bit of everything. Some zoning, some self-buffs, the works. This is going to sound a little harsh, but Saiko's niche is that she is a woman. The Yakuza series is a bit of a sausage fest. I don't know if you've noticed, but this roster is in desperate need of women. Saiko's barmaid style can be a basic brawling style, with a bit of focus on applying buffs to herself and debuffing her opponent. And she'd also have the barmaid job from 7, which I think would be a bit more of a limb zoner, kind of like Sawashiro. Son-hee is a bit of a unique case. I went back and forth on whether or not I should add Jun-Yi Han to this list, because I think he is quite the important character to the franchise, but I didn't want there to be too many Yakuza 6 reps, or too many reps from Ichiban's party, but I had an idea that I think can satisfy both of these. Son-hee would be a puppet character, with Jun-Yi Han being her puppet. I think it makes sense for both of these characters, and it would provide another unique playstyle to the roster. Her job variation can be the Night Queen job, where she would eschew her puppet playstyle and just be more of a traditional character with this job. It'd be more for people that want to play Son-hee but don't want to deal with the mental load of playing a puppet character more than anything else. Sayama is also here because she is a woman, I'm not going to lie to you. I don't really have anything for her on how she would fight. This roster just needs women, man. It's just dicks on dicks on dicks. I propose she could be a bit like Tanimura, although maybe just a bit more all-rounder than Tanimura, because, Tanimura, he's arresting and he's parrying and he's grappling. Maybe Sayama can have her gun. She's shown to be quite the sharp shot on a few occasions. Tatsuya Ukiyo was a challenge for me to come up with ideas for, because I've never actually played the Kurio games myself. One of the big gimmicks of the Kurio games, though, is that Tatsuya has a dizzying amount of fighting styles. He's a practitioner of 23 different fighting styles in Kurio 2. Among them is a sort of self-taught style, which is like a blank canvas fighting style, where you can Frankenstein move some other fighting styles together to create some truly maddening stuff. I think Tatsuya should have this self-taught style, and it would make him the game's expert character, like Kazuya Mishima or Akuma in Tekken 7. Super hard to get into, but he would be insanely rewarding for those that are willing to put the time into the game. I don't know how you would balance something like this, but that's not my problem. And finally, we have our resident Japanese freedom fighter / Cosmic Kiryu lookalike, Ryoma Sakamoto. He'd actually be pretty simple, with each of his fighting styles focusing on something different. The brawler style would definitely need an upgrade from its rendition in both OG Ishin and the remake, where it is by far the worst style in both of those games. The swordsman style would be a pretty standard sword fighting style, with the unique flair from the style brought over from Ishin to make it stand out against Somaya, the game's other swordsman. Gunman would be very zoning focused, maybe something like Happy Chaos from Guilty Gear Strive, although way less annoying to deal with. The Wildflower style would be a little bit of everything, because that's what it was in Ishin. With that though, I've discussed everybody that I think should be in this hypothetical Yakuza fighting game. I think it's fun to brainstorm stuff like this and try to imagine what a character would be on the roster and how they would play. I'm honestly surprised that there hasn't been a Yakuza fighting game yet. Maybe since RGG is working on that new Virtua Fighter, they can take what they learned from developing that game and use that knowledge towards a Yakuza fighting game. Before I end the video, here's a little mock-up I made of the finished roster. It's very low quality, but I am not a Photoshop expert. Anyways, if you made it this far in the video, thank you for watching, and let me know if you think that I missed anybody for the roster, or you have a different idea for how a character would play. Anyways, good night.